Welcome to Let's Talk About the Deep Stuff. I'm your host, Sean Neese. On this show, we have off-the-cuff and candid conversations about the big topics in the world. Conversations are monologues, but a monologue is a conversation with myself, and sometimes I have very interesting conversations with myself. But today I was going to talk about coincidences and synchronicities. Like, synchronicities is a topic that's interested me for a while, meaningful coincidences. I kind of view it like how, in a film, there's foreshadowing, there's little things that hint at what's going to happen, there's little meaningful coincidences that happen within like a story or a film script. And I kind of feel like the writer of the universe, the higher intelligence, the higher, does the same with our lives. And that's why we see repeating patterns sometimes, or have meaningful coincidences that I know I've had, or even, my parents, like they parted ways many times before they finally married and ended up having me and my sister and everything, but they'd always find like their way back to each other, like through just like weird chance happenings. So, and then they finally got married and had me and my sister, but like, they went through like a couple of years not speaking to each other, but then some chance encounter, like my dad just having to walk by the restaurant my mom was in, and then like saying hi, and like they kind of ran into each other by chance again, and that's how they reconnected many times. And like his friend, he said that his friend, who was an artist, like even painted a guy that looked like him and someone that looked like my mom before he knew my dad, and it was before he met my mom. So it was almost like some kind of like foreshadowing of my dad. Someone looked like my dad, and like this shorter redheaded woman that looked like my mom. So my dad was always the one that talked about meaningful coincidences like that in his life. And I've definitely seen it in my life too. So I do think there's a higher power. But, of course, one of the questions is, why would a higher power allow such suffering? And what I think it is higher power is really higher intelligence. Like, the higher level of human consciousness that is within us and within everything. It's everything we came from, and it's everything we are. And I think that the suffering is because of us not being in touch with our higher consciousness or our higher level, like, not having empathy and doing harm to others because we're not able to look at things from a higher perspective. So that's us. Like, if everybody was more in touch with that divine within us, then we would see less suffering, we would see less oppression, we would see less like horrible things in the world. Because yes, there's some natural disasters, but most things are man-made that are even natural disasters now, with the amount of pollution and everything having its effect on the earth and everything. But, I've experienced a lot of synchronicities in my own life. I think I mentioned seeing the deer, like in an earlier episode, like when I was really struggling with my depression. Like, I saw this deer, and she looked at me, and it was a doe with like compassionate eyes. It was almost sort of like a divine energy to it. Like telling me it's going to be okay, and it was kind of like the comfort I needed in that moment. And then ever since then, I started seeing deer at different times, or things related to deer, kind of like guiding my journey. And now it ended up being connected to this project I'm working on, which has become a big passion project of mine. I don't want to reveal anything about it just yet. When it's ready and everything, I'll reveal it, but I don't want to give anything away yet. But something I've been working on was inspired by that deer, and something I came up with in a creative project of mine. And I've had other things happen, like seeing someone's name in certain places, or seeing things that kind of mirror what I was thinking of or needed to hear at that time. I don't know but some people can say from a logical perspective that these things are always there, but your brain just notices what's important or processes it in a way that's important. But I just think there's been, for me, there's been things that are just too hard to explain. That I know there is some kind of higher intelligence to everything. And especially like from my parents' stories, what they said, like about how they always found their way back to each other despite everything. And like by odd chances, and plus that, the friend painting my father and my mother long before they met and long before they met my dad. So it's kind of like a weird foreshadowing there. But I also was diagnosed with OCD in my adulthood. More pure obsessional OCD. I feel like when I mention OCD, people think that it means like being obsessively clean and stuff like that. That's why I hate it when people say, "Oh, I'm a little OCD," because like OCD is a whole other thing, and it manifests in different forms. Each person's OCD is very unique. That's why I can feel like even more alienating sometimes, because you hear people talk about OCD and it doesn't necessarily mirror what your experience is with it. But mine's just mainly pure thought OCD. Like just today, I thought like if I shared a certain song, it would put someone I knew in danger. Just like weird irrational connections, like magical thinking and seeing symbols or numbers, and but so that's why with me, like I think some things are a higher intelligence, and there are like repeated numbers and numerology. Like numerology is even important in religion too. In the different religions, the different numbers have different significance and everything. And I think numbers do have significance to like how the universe and everything operates. It's kind of like a code, kind of like I know I said film before, but it's also kind of like, like how someone programs a video game. It's kind of like the numbers are kind of like the coding of the universe. And I've noticed like significant numbers in my life that reoccur and everything. But I also have to know when is it an actual like supernatural experience or synchronicity, and when is it just my OCD? Because like OCD will make significance out of patterns and stuff that aren't necessarily valid or whatever. I have a close friend. He has mental health issues of his own. I'm not going to go into details or name him or anything, but he's very spiritual. He's very knowledgeable about different religions. But he mentioned that sometimes when he wasn't getting like the right treatment or whatever, he would not be able to tell the difference between his delusions or like his religious belief, or because he believed he experienced the divine at times and that was actual divine, but he found it hard to differentiate his actual divine experiences or supernatural experiences with his delusions. Like he said that sometimes it was hard for him to tell what was his mental health issues and what was actually a spiritual experience. So I think that is something to consider, like with stuff like that too. Like, so it's good to be skeptical to a degree, a healthy bit of skepticism, but I do at the same time think there are things that can't just be mere coincidence, and there is true divine experience. You have to differentiate that between just your mind playing tricks on you and the actual thing. So yeah, that's where the whole question comes in. What's really going on with these coincidences? Is it something spiritual, or is it just my brain trying to find patterns, trying to make meaning out of chaos? I mean, from a logical standpoint, people say our brains are wired to look for patterns. Evolutionary, it helped us survive, seeing shapes in the grass that could be a predator, or finding connections in things that aren't really connected. So maybe that's all it is. Maybe I just notice the deer when I need a sign. Maybe I only remember the times something felt meaningful and forget the times it didn't. But at the same time, when something hits you that deeply, when it lines up so perfectly with your emotional state or your situation, it's hard to just write it off as a coincidence. I feel like that's where this spiritual explanation comes in, that there is something more, some kind of intelligence guiding things, or responding to our inner world in ways we don't fully understand. Taoism has a really interesting take on this. The Tao isn't a god in the way most people think of a god. It actually, I would say Taoism, out of all the religions, I don't subscribe to any organized religion, but out of all the religions, I feel like Taoism reflects like what I believe about God or the divine the most accurately, because I kind of view the divine as something undefinable, like something not concrete that we can really understand in simplistic terms. I feel like a lot of other religions kind of humanize God and make him like a human being and make it very simple, like, oh, he made the earth and that, instead of like, I like to look at like most religious texts as allegories or metaphors, rather than literal. And that's the way the mystics look at it. That's why the mystics look at and if you, like I said, if you're in sync with the Tao, you notice that things just happen in alignment, not because you force them, because you're flowing with life instead of against it. So that's how I think synchronicities work, like when you're aligned with that flow I'm talking about. And in other religions like Hinduism, there's the idea of karma and dharma. There's the spiritual blueprint, and that's also in Buddhism too. The karma and dharma. There's a spiritual blueprint, a path you're supposed to walk. And when you're on that path, the universe sort of responds. You get those signs, those nudges, those moments that seem too perfect to be random. And I kind of think that like what we feel in our heart is like our calling, and what we feel in our heart is right. Like that's sort of like our higher intelligence telling us what's the most fulfilling path for us, what's meant for us, I think that's why listening to that inner voice, that inner knowing, is what gives you the most fulfilled life, rather than just settling for what other people say you should do or what's convenient. Or I think go for what's really in your heart. Because I've mentioned Neville Goddard before on this show. I didn't want to mention him too much in this episode because I didn't want to get redundant, like just keep bringing him up. But he mentioned something along the lines of, view your desires as the spoken words of God. Like this is like that's your destiny, that's your calling. Like these if the divine created you, then these desires and these dreams you have are with you for a reason. That's your divine calling, Unless it's like some kind of desire to like hurt people or cause harm or something like that. No, not that. But if it's not that, and it's like a good thing, like something you want to contribute, something you want to do, something you're passionate about, then yeah, that's your higher calling. So even in Christianity, people talk about signs from God, right? You pray and something happens that feels like a direct answer. Maybe it's a person showing up in your life, or a line in a book, or just a feeling you get. And all of that kind of ties into what Carl Jung talked about, who was where he talked about synchronicity as meaningful coincidence. He said it's not just chance. It's when something in the outer world matches something in your inner world in a meaningful way. It's not cause and effect. It's more like a parallel event, reflection. He called it a casual connecting principle. Jung thought that it had to do with the collective unconscious, that deeper part of us that's connected to all humanity, and when something comes up from that depth, the outer world might mirror it. Like the inner transformation you're going through starts showing up in your external life. That's a synchronicity. It's like life is responding to your psyche. And that's the thing, there's a fine line between magical thinking and real spiritual awareness. But Jung wasn't dismissing it. He thought synchronicities were real and that they meant something. He even worked with physicist Wolfgang Pauli on this, trying to understand the link between mind and matter. And a lot of people throw the word synchronicity around like it's some kind of vague New Age concept. So I want to dive deeper into what Carl Jung meant about that. He wasn't trying to be mystical for the sake of it. He was trying to describe something real that he observed over and over again in therapy with his patients and in his own life. Jung defined synchronicity as a meaningful coincidence of two or more events, or something other than chance is at play. The key part is meaningful. Not just random shit happening at the same time, but something that actually lines up in a way that speaks to your psyche. Something that feels charged, like it carries a message. he separated it from causality, like A doesn't cause B, but they happen together in a way that reveals something deeper. You might be thinking about someone you haven't seen in years, and then they call you out of nowhere. That's not cause and effect. That's a connection between the inner and the outer, because your mental state in the outer world, that feels like it's coming from a deeper layer of reality. Jung believed that these kinds of events emerge from the collective unconscious, which is the shared archetypal layer of the human psyche. That's where symbols, myths, and dreams come from. These universal patterns that all people seem to tap into, regardless of time or culture. But I think I mentioned this in other shows, that I kind of feel like all religions, like the divine they're connected to, it's all the same divine. It's just like it manifests in different ways in different cultures. Because like that's like I feel like God or the divine manifests in the way that makes sense to you, but it's all the same divine. Even though like the religions are very different, because people put their own thoughts into it, and their beliefs and their own biases into it. Just like there's diversity in humanity, I think there's diversity in divinity too. So when you experience a synchronicity, it's like something archetypal has been activated in you, and the universe, or maybe just life itself, mirrors it back. You're not just thinking something, you're living through a symbol, and life is echoing it back to you. He talked about this with clients. Jung talked about this with clients too. One of the most famous examples is the story about a woman he was working with who was stuck. Super rational, super closed off emotionally. She had a dream about a golden scarab, this symbolic beetle. The next day, as she's telling Jung the dream, a scarab-like beetle taps on the window of his office. He opens it and hands it to her. In that moment, breaks something open in her. It's a symbol manifesting in reality, not caused by her dream, but linked to it through meaning. And that's the heart of synchronicity. It shows up when you're going through transformation. That, like the deer did with me. The deer was like a symbol of the transformation with me. In Lakota culture, deer, also known as Thaka, Thacha, are known as guardians on people's journeys. I hope I pronounced that right, Thaka. Guardians on people's journeys, so that kind of fits what I was saying too. And also, my friend Luke, who's of indigenous descent, I forget what tribe exactly, but he said that deer are known as good medicine in a lot of indigenous cultures. So there's a spiritual significance with that too. Like there's I'm not going to go into like too much specific, but like there's like it definitely. There were at times they came in and it was like a messenger trying to guide me and everything. But when something unconscious is becoming conscious, when you're right on the edge of change, Jung believed the psyche and the world are connected. Not in a magical woo-woo way, but in a deep structural way. Like reality itself has a psychic dimension. And like I mentioned before, he collaborated with physicist Wolfgang Pauli. They explored the idea that the psyche and matter might be two sides of the same coin. Psychoid reality, that's what happens in the mind, and what happens in the world aren't totally separate. And when they align, that's synchronicity. You know, that's why it's interesting when people say stuff like, oh, there's no scientific evidence for this or that. But it's like, we don't know everything in science yet. Science is always changing. Like, so like, how do we know? Like, of course there's shit that we haven't figured out yet or we don't understand. Just because there's no scientific evidence yet doesn't mean there wouldn't be or it doesn't exist. And maybe there's some things we can't measure in empirical ways necessarily, you know? Maybe there are things that are inexplicable or harder to explain. And part of some higher order of things. And when you see the synchronicity, it's not just a cool coincidence. It's a sign that your inner world and our world are touching. That something meaningful is being revealed through the connection. Jung saw it as a guide, especially through big life changes, death, heartbreak, rebirth, healing, self-realization. That really resonates with me with when I said when I was going through that hard time and I saw the deer, and then I started seeing deer everywhere, and they kind of looked at me like they were guiding me, being guardians on my journey. And they did help me self-improve and everything. And it's like the universe... Well, I mean, the deer didn't help me self-improve, but that was when I was going through a time of self-improvement and helping myself. So that fits with that. It's like the universe drops these breadcrumbs to say, keep going. You're on the right path. And I see that a lot with like recurring numbers with me too. But like I said, sometimes I have to be careful and make sure that's not just my OCD and that's actual, like, something valid. And synchronicities for Jung were like guideposts along that road. They'd show up in moments of psychological crisis or transformation when something unconscious was trying to resurface. He believed the psyche wants to evolve, and synchronicities are one way it pushes forward. Think of them like nudges from the deeper self. Not the ego, but the self with a capital S. The totality of who you are. You're not just figuring things out mentally. Life itself is responding. You're in this back and forth between your inner journey and what the world reflects back. Now contrast that with modern psychology. A lot of mainstream psychological models are very rational, very empirical, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it often leaves no room for these experiences. If you say you saw a sign or felt like the universe was speaking to you, they might chalk it up to confirmation bias, magical thinking, or cognitive distortions. And yeah, those things are real. Cognitive distortions are real. OCD, like I've mentioned multiple times, can make you find significance where there is none. But just because the mechanism of meaning making exists in the brain doesn't mean every experience of meaning is false. There's a line between delusion and deep intuitive perception. Jung was careful about that line. He wasn't saying every weird coincidence is divine, but that some of them are windows into something deeper. And modern psychology is slowly starting to come around. You've got fields like transpersonal psychology, depth psychology. Those are more open to the spiritual and symbolic dimensions of experience. They pick up where Jung left off, and they take seriously the idea that healing isn't just about rewiring the brain, but about reconnecting with meaning, with soul. And honestly, in a time when so many people feel lost or disconnected or spiritually numb, that kind of approach is more relevant than ever. People are craving depth. They're looking for something that goes beyond algorithms and diagnosis and just symptom management. They're looking for meaning. And synchronicity, when it's real, not just compulsive pattern finding, not just projection, but real synchronicity can be a breakthrough. A moment that reminds you you're part of something bigger. That your story isn't random. That there's some kind of intelligence, whatever you want to call it, that's working with you. So when I look at this stuff Jung was talking about, synchronicity, archetypes, dreams, the unconscious, it's wild how much of it lines up with what religion and spirituality have been saying for centuries, just using different symbols and stories. And I mentioned Taoism and some others earlier, but Buddhism, especially Tibetan Buddhism, there's this idea of dependent origination, how everything arises in connection with everything else. Nothing's isolated. Every thought, every action, every moment is part of a web. So when people talk about karma or auspicious signs or meaningful dreams, they're working with that idea. It's not random, it's all linked. The sense of the universe reflecting back to you what's going on inside. Even in Zen Buddhism, when they talk about sudden awakenings, those moments often come from weird everyday moments that hit you with clarity. Again, that's like a synchronicity. In Hinduism, especially in texts like the Bhagavad Gita, the world is seen as a divine play. Lila. Hopefully I pronounced that right. Lila is the word Lila. The gods and goddesses represent different parts of human experience, and they show up in stories that echo the archetypes Jung talked about. Shiva is destruction and rebirth. Kali is the shadow. Vishnu is the preserver. And then there's the idea that the divine lives within you. Atman is the Brahman. Like your deepest self is one with the universe. And that's kind of what I was talking about earlier. Like how I think that the divine is like higher human consciousness. It's within us and it's in everything. The Atman. And that's very similar to Jung's idea that the self, the capital S self, is this totality, this divine wholeness you're trying to reconnect with. Even mystical Christianity had similar themes. I think I mentioned this a bit earlier. Saints and mystics talked about seeing signs, having visions, dreams that changed their lives, moments of grace where they felt totally connected to God, or received some messages they weren't expecting. Carl Jung actually loved some of the older Christian mystics, like Meister Eckhart, who talked about God as a kind of formless divine ground that lives in us. He saw the Christian myth as one giant psychological story, the fall, the suffering, the redemption, all playing out in every human psyche. And you get similar themes in Sufism, the mystical side of Islam. They talk about the beloved, the divine that draws you closer through longing. The Sufi poet Rumi has all these verses about dreams, signs, symbols, and the soul's journey back to its source. And again, it's not always rational, it's felt. It's symbolic. It's full of mystery, just like synchronicity. And Hafiz is another one, besides Rumi. He's mentioned not quite as much as Rumi, but he's pretty known too. He was another great Sufi poet and mystic. So it's like Jung wasn't just making this stuff up out of nowhere. He was tapping into a current that's been there forever. And it's interesting, I've had dreams of like the river flowing and stuff like that, kind of getting into the flow, like telling me to get into a flow of life, to like not focus, get caught up in hitting roadblocks with what I want just now, and that it's all part of the process. Because I believe with persistence, you do achieve what you want. I think it's just sometimes you just hit roadblocks along the way, and I think that the journey is how you get there. The journey is more important than the destination. Like, let go of the how and just get into the flow. So Jung just gave all these ideas the psychological language for the modern world, but the core idea is ancient. There's something greater than us, something within us and around us. And when we're on the right path, or even when we're lost but searching, that force speaks to us through signs, through dreams, through coincidences that feel too perfect to be random. So how do you work with synchronicity without losing your mind or seeing signs in every shadow? I think the first thing is slow down and pay attention. Not obsessively, like scanning every license plate for hidden meanings, which I've done. I mean more like being present, which I haven't done as much as I should. And also noticing how you feel when something hits you deep. And also noticing how you feel when something hits you weird or hits you deep. Synchronicities usually come with a feeling, a weird stillness, a shiver, a moment when something just lands. Second, keep a record. You don't have to make it a ritual or anything. Just write them down. If something stands out, some phrase you keep hearing, someone's name showing up repeatedly, a dream that lines up with something in waking life, note it. Patterns don't show themselves all at once, they emerge over time. And when you keep track, you start seeing how threads connect. Third, ask questions. You don't need to pray in the traditional sense, but ask, what am I supposed to learn from this? Is this just coincidence, or is there a message? Ask from a place of openness, not fear or desperation. You'd be surprised what comes back. Sometimes it's in another coincidence. Sometimes it's a dream. Sometimes it's a sudden insight or a conversation you didn't expect. Now the tricky part, don't force meaning. That's where OCD or anxiety can sneak in. Just because you can make a connection doesn't mean it's significant. The meaning should feel alive. It should resonate, not feel like you're trying to solve a puzzle out of panic. And here's a big one. Trust your gut. If something feels off or anxious or compulsive, maybe step back. But if something gives you clarity, even if it's subtle, pay attention. This whole idea of synchronicity isn't that it answers everything, it's that it illuminates. It shines a light on what's relevant. Like the Tao says, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. That teacher might be a person, or a sentence in a book, or a deer in the woods that locks eyes with you when you're thinking about giving up. Synchronicity doesn't demand belief. It invites you to listen. And you don't have to believe in anything supernatural. Jung didn't say it was proof of God. He said it was proof that the psyche and the world aren't as separate as we think. that the inner and outer world mirror each other when we're aligned. That's powerful on its own. So in your life, start noticing. Track it. Ask. Reflect. Let it guide, not control. It's not about finding the one big answer. It's about being in dialogue with the universe, or with the deeper part of yourself that already knows the way. So to wrap this up, synchronicity isn't about trying to predict the future or prove some grand design. It's about noticing when something cuts through the noise, when the inner world and the outer world line up in a way that actually matters to you. Whether you see it as divine guidance, unconscious intelligence, or just part of how unconsciousness works, the point is, you're not as disconnected as you think. The world isn't random static. There's pattern, there's rhythm, and sometimes that rhythm speaks. But don't get lost in it. Use it. Let it inspire you. Let it keep you curious. Let it push you towards self-awareness, creativity, healing, whatever path you're on. And if you're skeptical, good. Be skeptical. Just stay open, too. Sometimes things don't make sense until much later. Sometimes the meaning shows up long after the moment passed. That's the deep stuff. That's what this show is for. Well, thank you for listening to Let's Talk About the Deep Stuff. I'm your host, Sean Kneese. We'll catch you on the next episode, and keep updated with future episodes on Spotify, iTunes, wherever you get your podcasts, social media. Let's Talk About the Deep Stuff, or Sean Kneese, SeankNeese. And yeah, that's about it for this one. We'll catch you on the next one.